Now, more than ever, to be a teacher requires patience, kindness, and understanding. Fortunately, Astoria Elementary has just hired such an individual. Arnold Schwarzenegger is Kindergarten Cop.
I've always had a soft spot for Japanese media that's set in the West. As an ethnically homogenous and somewhat culturally insular island nation, the popular Japanese perception of the West, especially America, is largely informed by movies and TV shows. The reverse is also true for us here in the English-speaking world, but unlike Japan, there's not too much Western-made media that's entirely divorced from our own cultural and geographic comfort zone. If a story steps outside the West, we're usually given a Western protagonist to guide us through this strange land. Audiences want a bit of familiarity to keep them grounded, and these days, there's typically a very concentrated effort to make sure we portray that foreign world in a sensitive and balanced fashion. I don't really feel one way or another about this kind of thing, but I do find it incredibly endearing that Japan doesn't feel the need to play by those same rules. They're not afraid to tell American stories of American people having all-American adventures in America. Some of the biggest Japanese games fit that mold, and we don't really mind when large chunks of it feel uncanny or amusingly off base. There's a harmless and good-natured feeling that shines through even when the material is obviously satirical. It's fun to see our everyday world filtered through this foreign lens where Hollywood movies serve as the primary reference point. The original Silent Hill games are some of my favorite examples of this.
You from around here? Why don't you tell me what happened?
Wait a second, I'm just a tourist.
Set in a fictional resort town in foggy rural Maine, Silent Hill pulls from a huge amount of Western influences to shape its scares and ground its setting. This was a series created by young Japanese people who loved Western horror. Every corner of Silent Hill holds a reference to a spooky novel or cult film. Every character takes its first and last name from Hollywood actors or fictional Western characters. And the influence of Western metal, industrial, and trip hop music played an enormous role in setting its soundtrack apart from every other horror game out there. We could easily spend hours upon hours dissecting every little reference in these original games. And the fact that Team Silent were unusually forthcoming about what inspired them would make that job a whole lot easier. Still, I do think it's important to draw a hard distinction between reference and influence. Eddie from Silent Hill 2 takes his name from Eddie Murphy, but that doesn't mean that Norbert or the Nutty Professor influenced these games. Not every cheeky reference is hinting at some deep connection, and I also think that the game's supplementary materials are a bit too liberal with what they call an influence. I've learned a lot from these translated guides and art books, but they also have a tendency to sound like a laundry list of the team's favorite movies, books, and bands, rather than a helpful map to the series' most important inspirations. With all that in mind, we're going to sift out all the trivia and one-off references to focus on what I consider to be the original game's most crucial influences. The bits of media that helped to set this title apart from its competition and fueled the passions of a young team who would change the horror game landscape. I'm well aware that Silent Hill 2 was the breakout hit and YouTube analysis favorite, and as influences tend to stretch across the series, it's only natural that I'll make references to it and the other PS2 sequels. But to keep this video concise and respect the depth of each original entry, we're going to keep our sights mostly focused on the original 1999 PlayStation game. So grab an extra pair of undies and pop in your authentic copy of this very affordable game, and join me as we take a trip to Silent Hill. As unbelievable as this may sound, I am not a 40-year-old Japanese man. So if you want to know why Japan had such a cultural obsession with David Lynch in the 90s, then maybe I'm not your guy. But if I had to take a guess, I'd point to Lynch's ever-present love for exploring the duality of idyllic American settings. Many of Lynch's best-known works can be characterized by this dichotomy where wholesome America meets bizarre and abstract expressions of evil. By day, Lynch's worlds can be picturesque American settings, filled with bright blue skies, red cherry pie, and, pardon my language, damn fine coffee. But lurking beneath the surface you'll find drug abuse, sadistic cruelty, and surreal depictions of very upsetting subjects that often leave the viewer with more questions than answers.
Does duality play a lot in your work?
Well, yeah, duality, yeah. Yeah.
It's this entirely genuine affection for the coziness of a perfect American life that makes the rough stuff so unexpected and frightening. The Japanese have a long-standing tradition of mystery and horror in their own art, and as a side effect of the post-World War II American occupation, they've also built a variety of subcultures based around the classic cool of 50s America. There's an enduring love for denim jeans, James Dean, and Harley Davidsons that appeals to a rebellious nostalgia for post-war Japan. These are images that Lynch loves to play around with too. So when a murder mystery like Twin Peaks came along and stirred all those elements into one big pot, its wild success in Japan doesn't seem so strange after all.
The Japanese people seem to yearn for a mysterious atmosphere, which also characterizes, for example, the Twilight Zone.
Lynch's popularity naturally spilled over into gaming, and it's an influence we can still feel today. We wouldn't have Persona's Igor and the Velvet Room without Lynch's Red Room and the Man from Another Place. The quirky dialogue in Link's Awakening was openly inspired by the uncanny melodrama from Twin Peaks. Mizurna Falls held the fascination of PS1 fans for decades until its fan translation, and Deadly Premonition is either the world's most elaborate Twin Peaks homage or parody depending on how you look at its intentions. But it's Lynch's influence on Silent Hill that's the most interesting of the bunch, with Team Silent often crediting Twin Peaks and many of his other works as crucial influences on the series. Lynchian is one of those overused and increasingly meaningless adjectives like Kafkaesque or Lovecraftian. Lynch himself had no idea what it meant, and it's a term you'll find a lot of varying definitions for. But if we put on our dum-dum caps and really boil it down to mean something where a nice mundane world has abstract surreal horror lurking underneath, then yeah, Silent Hill is definitely a very Lynchian game.
Everyone seems to have disappeared. And it's snowing out, this time of year. Something's gone seriously wrong.
After all, the town itself is a lakeside resort destination, with Harry and Cheryl visiting for a holiday. Locations are detailed and realistic, but also largely mundane. Take out the fog and monsters and you could easily slot these environments into a game without any supernatural elements. Resident Evil might be set in a residence turned evil, but that house is still Disney's Haunted Mansion, with a shark tank, boulder maze, and underground science lab. By comparison, Silent Hill's primary locations are a school, hospital, and the empty streets of a tourist town. Unless you're secretly watching this from an Amish village, you probably know what these places look like. It's that everyday familiarity which makes the transitions into the nightmarish otherworld all the more unsettling. And when the lights come back on, we're reminded of just how ordinary the town really is. That appreciation for Lynchian duality is also expressed in the game's characters and story. In Silent Hill, our key players aren't special forces or evil scientists, but instead a widowed father and his young daughter, a sleazy businessman, a determined female cop, a nurse struggling with addiction, and a young burn victim with an abusive religious fanatic for a mother. Despite the paranormal elements, the core of this story is still centered around the quiet suffering and uncomfortable secrets the town keeps behind closed doors. Those mysteries only begin to unravel when an outside figure is drawn in and forced to make sense of it all, following a tragedy involving a teenage girl. As our hero gets closer to the truth, the more distorted and abstract their reality becomes, with the grotesque and supernatural becoming inseparable from the mundane. Those are the broad strokes of how Lynch's favourite themes influenced the original game. It wasn't the first game to combine spooky evils with a suburban world, and as we'll soon find out, Lynch obviously wasn't the first artist to explore these kinds of ideas. But when we zoom out and examine the original series as a whole, very specific story beats, visual motifs, and musical influences clearly reflect just how much Team Silent took from Lynch and his many collaborators. We're about to get balls deep into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen Twin Peaks or Lost Highway, skip ahead to the timecode below. An idyllic small town haunted by the tragedy of a young girl and surrounded by an unknown mystic darkness, possibly of Native American origin. A secret society aware of that darkness who have operated since the town's earliest days, and a wealthy businessman who smuggles drugs into the same community. A deranged, abusive parent who tries to force a demonic spirit into the body of their daughter. Before the ritual is completed, a different bad guy alters its course with the help of a magical item, killing the girl but allowing her soul to live on in another form. A foreboding painting of a mysterious door that our hero later enters while trapped inside a nightmare world. A pivotal scene where the protagonist witnesses a bizarre assault through an apartment's closet door. Female doppelgangers, alter egos, opposites, and merging identities represented by blonde hair. Lost Highway in particular has quite a few almost one-to-one parallels with Silent Hill 2. Like how about a sexually frustrated man who murders his dark-haired wife, then enters a dissociative fugue state to avoid confronting it. In a dreamy alternate reality, he meets a blonde and flirtatious doppelganger of that dead wife, who initially represents a sexy little fantasy getaway from his shortcomings as a man. Subconsciously, he creates a menacing figure who forces him to face the truth of what he's done, which is only then revealed through a grainy VHS tape of the murder. What a movie, what a game.
And she's getting close. Now reach some kind of climax. And I would go, and he said, oh, that's it. Oh, that's so beautiful. Angelo, oh, that's tearing my heart out.
One of Lynch's most enduring partners in crime was composer Angelo Badalamenti. His ethereal and often oddly jazzy scores are inseparable from the majority of Lynch's filmography. It's hard to imagine Twin Peaks without those ominous falling synths, melodramatic keyboards, and plodding bass samples. Silent Hill's composer, Akira Yamaoka, is one of many who cites Badalamenti as an influence. Yamaoka's work largely lacks that classic film noir feeling that Badalamenti's tracks tend to invoke, but there's a clear admiration for his sense of foreboding eeriness that permeates throughout the series. With that said, there's two very specific moments from the original game which feel like deliberate homages to Badalamenti's style, the first of which features synths and bass tones that are highly reminiscent of his work on Twin Peaks. The second instance plays over my favorite moment from the original game, the post-credits blooper reel. I absolutely love how such a miserable story ends with one final moment of surrealism, where all the characters break the fourth wall to give us big cheesy smiles as if they were actors goofing off on a film set. It's a bold way to end such a weird game, and you could very easily picture the characters of Twin Peaks doing the exact same thing. We'll be getting into more of Silent Hill's musical influences later on, but while we've still got David on the brain, I think it's important to recognize Lynch's influence on the game's sound design. By 1999, plenty of films had used grungy industrial soundscapes to great effect, and trying to pinpoint exactly where and when any genre began is often a very murky and contradictory process. I'm not about to suggest that Lynch invented the dark ambient genre, but the soundtrack he and Alan Splett created for 1977's Eraserhead does feel like the most significant and influential of those early works. It's a cacophony of rattling pipes, sputtering machinery, and howling winds, with only the faintest echoes of a pipe organ sitting underneath. It's an amazing auditory reflection of this world that feels like it's been forgotten and left to rust out in the rain. Eraserhead's soundtrack had a huge influence on the composers and sound designers who came after it, And as games embraced CDs as a storage medium, we began to see similarly complex and multi-layered ambient soundtracks creep their way into moody games. Silent Hill wasn't the first CD game to feature a dark ambient score. That title probably goes to Aubrey Hodges' work on Doom's PlayStation port. But nevertheless, Akira Yamaoka's work on the original game embodies Eraserhead's industrial sound better than any of its contemporaries. You won't find any Halloween music or tribal chanting in the vibrations of Silent Hill. Just boilers wheezing in and out, the clanging of metal on metal, and the whine of dying electronics. Like Eraserhead, the greatest strength of Silent Hill's audio is its ability to mirror the world around it in such an appropriate way. I also don't think it's a coincidence that both Eraserhead and the first two Silent Hills begin with an extended sequence where the protagonist wanders through an empty urban setting while soaking in the industrial ambience. The opening of Eraserhead even features an air raid siren, something that Lynch would reuse in an experimental straight-to-VHS music video called Industrial Symphony No. 1. Team Silent weren't too interested in the flying babies, but they were smitten with the air raid siren, with director Keiichiro Toyama directly crediting Industrial Symphony for inspiring its iconic use in Silent Hill's Otherworld.
Damn! My head.
What's wrong? Harry?
One common criticism of both Lynch's works and Silent Hill is the uncanny, almost laughably awkward quality to some of its performances. Despite many of Lynch's movies containing unambiguously incredible performances, there's also a very intentional appreciation for overacting and pregnant pauses that contributes to the overall surrealist tone. Silent Hill features that same kind of soap opera rhythm, and I'm really of two minds as to whether or not this was an intentional homage to Lynch. On the one hand, Japanese games of this era often had a so bad it's good quality to its English voice work, thanks to the lack of local native speakers and the enormous language barrier between actor and developer.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
But on the other, these bizarre performances are a quality that persisted well into the later entries. As budgets grew, talent became of a higher standard, and Westerners were brought on to help direct. In an interview with Harry's voice actor, Michael Gwen, he recalls how recording director Haruhiko Inaba would ask for lengthy pauses between each line of spoken dialogue, reassuring Gwen that these would be edited out for the final product. That obviously didn't happen, and this anecdote only serves to make the situation all the more muddled.
Give me that!
What is this?
That's none of your business.
I just don't know whether or not these awkward voiceovers were a deliberate artistic choice or a long-running fumble from Konami. Still, regardless of intent, the end result ultimately serves the art in the same way that Lynch's hokey performances serve his. It's just one more ingredient to make this world feel more alien and divorced from reality, so I wouldn't have it any other way. It's a shame that Lynch himself likely wasn't aware of Silent Hill. He always seemed to be quite flattered by those he influenced, and I like to think he would have appreciated the abstract ghoulishness of the PS1's graphics. He was hugely passionate about new technologies like digital film and Photoshop. He created some very off-putting commercials for the PS2, and almost made a point-and-click adventure game with Japanese developer Synergy Incorporated. If any of these crazy works seem appealing to you, but you're not sure where to start, then I'd recommend Season 1 of Twin Peaks. If mainstream audiences in 1990 could get something out of it, then so can you. Or, if you're short on time and feeling a bit more adventurous, check out Blue Velvet. Don't be intimidated by the bewildering abstraction of his more difficult moments. Just enjoy the ride and focus on how it makes you feel. Like Silent Hill, his work rewards repeat viewings, where you can really rummage around for foreshadowing, metaphors, and hidden details that weren't obvious the first time around. But in spite of that, Lynch always stressed the validity of each viewer's individual interpretation. The Silent Hill series was born from Team Silent's interpretation, and considering the body of work he left behind, there's no telling which developers he might inspire next.
And it's an honest film, but it's very abstract. So it's not fair for me to say that's a definite, way that has to be interpreted. People interpret it, the way they see it.
Collectively speaking, the many works of David Lynch are definitely Silent Hill's largest influence. But if we had to pick one singular film that had the largest impact on the series, it would be 1990's Jacob's Ladder, a highly influential psychological horror centered around the hallucinations and fractured memories of an American Vietnam War vet. Director Keiichiro Toyama, series producer Akihiko Imamura, and many others have often expressed a fondness for the film and stressed its role in shaping the series' DNA. Things aren't going too well for Jacob, with the poor boy suffering through a never-ending string of lucid dreams, combat flashbacks, and horrible nightmares. Jacob's waking reality is constantly subject to sudden disturbing shifts, and in a very broad way, I'm sure this quality had an effect on Silent Hill's unstable back-and-forth nature. The first game is where Jacob's influence is most obvious, but cheeky nods to the film would persist into the sequels, like James and Jacob sharing the same M65 field jacket, or the lengthy train station sequence in 3, which contains numerous Easter eggs and parallels to Jacob's nightmare in the New York subway. But enough waffling. Let's get down to business and bring out the scary hospital. In just a few short scenes, we have the entire blueprint for Silent Hill's Otherworld Hospital laid out for us. Disfigured humans hopping across gory metal grates, whirring industrial fans, nurses with little guys popping out of them, and then, suddenly everything is back to normal. If I had not seen The Jacob's Ladder, I would never have made such an Otherworld, says Ito. I've got one more big connection in the bag, but once again, I can't show it without getting into major spoilers, so skip ahead in case you'd like to watch it. The film's final twist reveals that Jacob and his unit were the test subjects for an experimental combat enhancement drug. They all went apeshit and killed each other instead of the enemy, and the events of the film were taking place either inside purgatory or Jacob's mind as he lies on a stretcher refusing to accept his own death. Alessa Gillespie is also a dreamer on the verge of death, and the monsters that both of their psyches conjure up are twisted manifestations of traumas they experienced in life. For Alessa, it's dangerous dogs, mean classmates, and abusive adults with a sprinkling of messed up fairy tale creatures. For Jacob, it's the doctors, amputees, and dead soldiers he encountered after killing his buddies and being mortally wounded. There is a bit more ambiguous weirdness in there on Jacob's end, but I do think most of the demons are meant to draw from his war service. I like Jacob's Ladder just fine. It's a good movie, but I've never been crazy about it like Team Silent were. The biblical symbolism is very ham-fisted, and I think the final twist cheapens a lot of the appealing ambiguity by turning Jacob's journey into a bit of a Twilight Zone episode. Still, for all its messy ideas, I do consider this a must-watch for horror fans purely for the visuals and nightmare sequences. Not a crumb of CGI to be found either, just amazing in-camera effects from a crew who busted out every trick in the book to give you the willies.
By way of explaining what we're about to do, I am first going to tell you a little bit about the country called Tibet.
We've already discussed the influence of Angelo Badalamenti and Eraserhead's industrial-tinged dark ambience, but for a soundtrack as diverse as the Silent Hill series, those are only two small pieces of the overall pie. Was composer Akira Yamaoka influenced by classic industrial acts like Skinny Puppy, Coil, or Throbbing Gristle? How did commercial sound libraries factor into his musical output, and what about all the moody trip hop that colours the game's quieter moments? Well, back in 2002, Yamaoka provided a list of his favourite bands and albums to spellmusic.net. It's a very eclectic mix of metal, synth pop, post-punk, and alt-rock, but there's nothing here that I'd predominantly classify as industrial music. Many of these albums have pummeling, danceable elements that can be reminiscent of industrial rock, but ultimately they belong to a different category. Later in the interview, Yamaoka tells us, "I never listened to industrial music at all, neither at work nor private time. I think you need to have a lot of courage and guts and patience to listen to the industrial sound," and that despite his own listening habits, Yamaoka ultimately chose the industrial sound to set Silent Hill apart from the competition, citing its cold and rusty feeling as very fitting to the game's themes. Now that's all well and good. The man likes his corn at home, but chose a different genre for the games he worked on. But before we move on, I think there's a certain special someone Yamaoka forgot to mention. It's the potions master himself, Michael Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. In 2012, Yamaoka called Reznor his main inspiration, and that it was a personal dream to meet him someday. Now I know this statement comes about 13 years after the original game, but that's a pretty big bomb to drop. At the time of Silent Hill's debut, Reznor had released 3 highly successful records and also provided the soundtrack to Quake. Yamaoka was clearly into some pretty esoteric Western metal, so the idea that he hadn't heard Nine Inch Nails until after 2002 does seem a little unlikely. Those early Nine Inch Nails albums pull from a very diverse range of non-industrial influences. But at the heart of it, Reznor's 90s output is unmistakably an industrial rock project. And if any of those first 3 records would have an influence on Silent Hill, it would be 1994's The Downward Spiral. By far the most dissonant and abrasive of the bunch, we can see the album's potential influence in both its noisiest moments and when it pulls back to establish some uncomfortable ambience. As far as I can tell, that's where Reznor's theoretical influence on the original game begins and ends. Yamaoka took the embellishments of noise and static, but left the riffs and melodies. The same is largely true for Psychic TV and Sonic Youth, 2 groups that the original game references directly. The drug that Kaufman is smuggling into town is named after Psychic TV, and the Orridge Bridge control room takes its name from the group's leader, Genesis Porridge. Porridge was also the driving force behind Throbbing Gristle, pioneers of industrial music who ran a label which the genre is named after. Their uniquely disturbing and completely off-putting early albums are still the stuff of nightmares. Like the soundtrack to Eraserhead or Nine Inch Nails, its influence on Silent Hill is still largely noise-related. I'm sure the rusty scraping and haywire electronics provided Yamaoka with some atmospheric inspiration, but otherwise I think this is just a cheeky wink to the genre's origins. Now, as a fan of Sonic Youth myself, I'm a bit peeved that my parents didn't send me to Midwich Elementary, where all 4 members of the band apparently worked as teachers. Sonic Youth are not industrial, and by 1999, they'd already built a pretty large discography, with plenty of approachable and commercially successful alt-rock albums. So to find their connection to Silent Hill, we have to reach back into their menacing early 80s stuff, where guitars wail over hypnotic chants and melodies just aren't welcome. Silent Hill also has its own fair share of tuneless whirlwind guitars, so I do think their influence on the game is more than just an Easter egg. Before we move on to trip hop's very concrete influence, it's worth acknowledging the sample CDs that Yamaoka used extensively throughout the original series. Unlike the soundtrack to Eraserhead, where Lynch and Splet recorded every little scrape and hiss themselves, Silent Hill's soundscapes largely stem from the manipulation of commercially available pre-recorded samples, especially those from a company called Spectrasonics. I won't be going into this myself since there's a great video out there which already covers it, but it is worth mentioning since Silent Hill would sound a lot different without them. This is not some kind of gotcha moment either. I guarantee some of your favorite game soundtracks use these exact same sound libraries and you probably don't even know it. Yamaoka used these samples in very creative ways, and it's a testament to his abilities that you can't always tell where each particular sample slots in. For a soundtrack that's dominated by harsh industrial noise, it's a little ironic that its most standout moments are actually the smattering of very subdued trip-hop tracks. This is definitely oversimplifying things, but for all the musically challenged viewers out there, you can think of trip-hop as hip-hop's more downbeat and introspective little brother. There's a greater emphasis on atmosphere, and often it can be quite melancholy, with soulful female vocals. Trip-hop emerged out of Bristol in the late 80s, and of those early groups, it's the legendary Portishead that had the greatest impact on Silent Hill. No lengthy explanations needed for this one, just a few snippets of the game's main theme alongside Portishead's early single, Sour Times. Like the hospital scene from Jacob's Ladder, this is one of those immediate aha moments, where all the ingredients of its influence are plain to see. Tremolo-picked strings, punchy lo-fi drum samples, and echoing guitar stings that bring 60s spy movies to mind. Guitarist Adrian Utley was very fond of that James Bond meets spaghetti western guitar sound, and it's a tone you hear Yamaoka pulling out for many of his own tracks too. None of this is speculation either. You'll find a Portishead poster in the opening diner area, and Yamaoka has specifically cited Portishead and their Bristolian buddies, Massive Attack, as ideal groups to create an official Silent Hill arrange album. Yamaoka's use of trip hop would expand considerably into the sequels, especially on 3 and 4. But it's here in the 1999 original where a few tracks laid the groundwork for what would become an essential pillar of the Silent Hill sound. Just like the game's use of noisy industrial, the sprinkling of trip hop was another bold move by Yamaoka, which helped to differentiate it from every other horror game on the market. You can create a pretty great trip hop mixtape just by picking out your favorite tracks from the original 4 games. But if that's still not enough, then I'd recommend diving into the classics of the genre, like Portishead's debut album, Mezzanine by Massive Attack, or Introducing by DJ Shadow. These are great gateways into the genre, and always perfect for a rainy night in.
Now we're going to do something extremely fun. We're going to play a wonderful game called Who is My Daddy and What Does He Do?
I know I said this video wasn't going to dwell on random trivia, but when it concerns the Sperminator himself, I haven't got much of a choice.
The Sperminator. I come again.
1990's Kindergarten Cop is a landmark in Arnie's filmography, rivaled only by the movie where he falls pregnant with Danny DeVito's baby. The film stars the Austrian oak as Detective John Kimball, an LA police officer going undercover as a kindergarten teacher to find a missing mother and son. To Western audiences, I suppose it's worth a few laughs, but for Team Silent, it provided valuable reference material for the creation of Midwich Elementary. Not only is the front of the school a dead ringer for the one in Kindergarten Cop, but many of the level's textures are ripped straight from the posters you'll see in the movie. Same number 7 yellow school bus too. Despite Konami's lack of faith in the project, we do know that Team Silent took a trip to America to get a feel for the first game's setting. I'm sure they took some helpful pictures of streets and suburbs, but there probably weren't too many primary schools willing to help these young Japanese guys with their blood-soaked industrial PlayStation game. In the end, all it took was one VHS tape of Kindergarten Cop to save the day. They've never mentioned it, but it's undeniably one of the most concrete influences in this entire video. With over 65 novels and 200 short stories to his name, Stephen King could be the official spokesman for Big Cocaine. Like him or lump him, his influence in the realm of horror, thriller, and supernatural fiction is incredibly pervasive. The man is an absolute factory of classic tropes, and regardless of whether you've read him or not, you've likely seen an adaptation of his work without realizing he penned the original story. Much like Lynch, King's stories often take place inside nostalgic little American settings, where horrible things happen to humdrum people. For Lynch, the horror is something surreal and intrinsic that comes from within, but for King, that fear is typically more fantastical and external, like creatures from another dimension, a monster from outer space, or spirits who have haunted the land for who knows how long. I'm making some broad generalizations about a very diverse body of work here, but hopefully it paints a picture of how Team Silent combined both influences to create their own spin on horror in a mundane world. The original game is littered with references to King, some of which are surprisingly niche. Clearly the team were big fans of the guy, and I'm sure it's no coincidence that Harry is a writer, just like many of King's protagonists are. One of the game's official guidebooks even features artwork by Shinsaku Fujita, an illustrator who created many of the Japanese covers to King's translated works. But when we really get down to it, we can see King's largest influences on the game in two of his earlier works, 1974's Carrie, his debut novel, and 1980's The Mist, two works that are specifically referenced in Silent Hill's Book of Lost Memories. As a New England native himself, King sets many of his stories in fictional towns across the state of Maine. Silent Hill is also a fictional town in the state of Maine. And what's Maine got plenty of? Fog and mist.
Something in the mist! Something in the mist!
Dan.
Cook John Lee!
Dan, catch your breath.
The Mist is a psychological horror novella where a supernatural mist traps a group of everyday people inside a grocery store. Hiding amongst the mist are giant nasty insects, flying pterodactyl monsters, and other lethal creepy crawlies which keep the shoppers from leaving. What follows is a disturbing sci-fi allegory about how ordinary people tend to react in similar high-pressure situations, like a natural disaster. Now, I'm sure I don't have to spell out how big monsters hiding in the mist of a New England town could have influenced Silent Hill. Yamaoka has cited The Mist as being a great source of inspiration to the original team, and Harry's first interaction with the notepad references a line from the end of the book. But it does go deeper than that. In a 2016 interview between Fatal Frame director Makoto Shibata and Silent Hill 1 director Keiichiro Toyama, Shibata recalls how Toyama originally wanted to create a video game adaptation of The Mist, with Toyama explaining that various obstacles eventually transformed the project into an original story instead. The final game's iconic fog is one of those elements that likely persisted from the project's earliest days as a King adaptation. According to Yamaoka, the team loved this initial idea of a foggy game world, and that it also served as an effective way to work around the limitations of the aging PlayStation hardware. The original game is an incredibly ambitious late-gen release, with performance that often tanks into a very low frame rate on real hardware. To keep things from turning into a slideshow, draw distance is kept to a minimum, with the game's fog effect helping to obscure pop-in while Harry moves about the game world. It's certainly not perfect, but considering the fog's origins as a highly intentional visual effect, and its dual purpose as a way to mask pop-in, this is very much one of those endearingly imperfect happy accidents with a great backstory. Silent Hill wasn't the only late 90s game inspired by The Mist either, but maybe that's a story for another day. Ultimately, The Mist's influence over the game is a mostly aesthetic one, and if we want to see how Stephen King inspired the mythology and backstory of Silent Hill, we have to look to 1974's Carrie instead. Because without Carrie White, there would be no Alessa Gillespie. Spoilers from here on in.
Creepy Carrie! Creepy Carrie!
Carrie is the story of a very weird teenage girl with telepathic powers. She's not exactly the coolest kid on the block, with the popular girls planning an elaborate prank to publicly humiliate her on prom night, a plot which culminates in Carrie massacring her schoolmates with her awakened psychic abilities. It's a hell of a revenge fantasy, and many aspects of Carrie's character directly inspired Silent Hill's own magical sad girl, Alessa. Both girls are raised under a domineering single mother with fanatic religious beliefs. They're bullied at school for being different, and the onset of puberty gives their mother some pretty funny ideas. In the end, the mother is ready to sacrifice her child for a greater religious ideal, the house burns to the ground, and the girl ends up killing her mother instead. The girl's rampage comes to a tragic end, but her presence lingers ambiguously, with the implication that not all is said and done. Stephen King's Carrie is not my favorite Carrie, and Stephen King's Mist is not my favorite Mist, but both books are definitely worth a read, and the film adaptations I've shown here are well worth your time. I'd specifically recommend the black and white director's cut of The Mist, which helps to hide some pretty hokey late 2000s CGI. Well, what do you know, we've come to the end of our video. I think it's a great credit to Team Silent that despite taking so much from Western horror, that the original series never feels like a derivative pastiche of its inspirations. As harsh as this may sound, that's an impressive feat for something that owes a lot of its initial identity to pre-existing media. Even after digging through all these influences and analysing them in depth, I still don't view Silent Hill as the work of Westaboo fanboys. The blending of its many disparate influences came together to create something that feels confidently cohesive. It's not afraid to pay tribute to the media that inspired it, but you never get the sense that this world is just an homage to something greater that came before it. Part of that is thanks to how unprecedented a product like Silent Hill was within its medium. But another factor we can't ignore is that unique foreign perspective through which all of its influences were filtered. In their attempt to develop a game for the Western market, this young Japanese team inadvertently created something that feels neither Western nor Japanese. That distorted, upside-down feeling is a quality that only strengthens Silent Hill's effectiveness as a horror game. It's an inseparable part of the game's appeal and an undefinable X factor that sets it apart from its Western-made spin-offs and indie imitations. Silent Hill is not original, but for all the reasons we've just gone over, I think it's a glowing example of the old saying, talent borrows, genius steals.